Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm super excited today because we have Gabriella Taylor on this episode, and she is warm, friendly, beautiful from the inside out. She has so much to say that I think every woman on the planet should hear.
I agree completely. This is an extraordinary podcast today.
Enjoy the show.
But what do I know? I'm just a vagina doctor. Gabriella Taylor, so nice to see you and welcome to the Vagina Doctor podcast.
Happy to be here.
You're a Master of Arts. You're a relationship specialist.
I'm laughing because I thought you said a Master of Riots at first.
Oh.
And my brain had to take a minute to chuckle at that. Now I understand what you said.
Okay.
But anyhow, thank you for that. I'm a Master of Riots as well as a Master of Arts.
Like that one. And you're the founder of the Extraordinary Woman Coaching Service. Tell me about it.
Basically, it's a boutique coaching service where since 1997, I've been working with women really in all matters, whether they have a cool idea that they want to bring to life that is meant to help really make the world a better place, or they're struggling in love and relationships, or they're struggling with living under the beauty myth that all of us women have been affected by, that told us that there's something wrong with our bodies, or they're struggling with self-doubt, or really most matters of the feminine heart, spirit, and psyche is what I support women with.
The one of the things that we talked about in our discussions previously was this epidemic of unacknowledged trauma that women have experienced, affecting their health. And in my specialty, pelvic issues, pelvic pain. There are so many things that contribute to those sort of symptoms for patients, and some of them are diagnosable, easily diagnosable, endometriosis perhaps, irritable bowel syndrome, urinary issues, but there's a huge part of it that we can't get to the bottom of, or it seems so difficult to get to the bottom of. And that was the thing that resonated with me was, okay, let's talk about this as being really tangible now. So talk to me about the epidemic.
I mean, I think we have to sort of pan backwards and look at the whole picture, where we live in a culture that is very individualistic and looks at symptoms or looks as problems as these isolated little fragmented mechanistic sort of issues, instead of looking at the whole. You know, everything in terms of the Western medicine model, instead of looking at the whole of the person and how all of their physiological systems work together, looking at the whole of someone's emotional well-being, looking at the whole of how even interconnected we are with life on this planet and how we, treat the soil, the water, the air of this planet. So to me, on a big scale, there's a massive disconnect, and we're really seeing the crises that are emerging more and more because of this disconnect. And so on a meta scale, we just see that there are, especially when it comes to women's bodies, and I mean all humans, but women's bodies in particular, we have been taught from the beginning that really our body doesn't own to us. It belongs to the person that we're going to procreate with. It belongs to the eyes of somebody else to determine if we are attractive enough. It belongs, like our women's self-worth often belongs to the perception of others around us, depending on whatever the eyes are that are looking at her. So when it comes to our relationship with our bodies and the most vulnerable parts of our bodies, our reproductive organs, our sexual health, pairing that with the epidemic of sexual trauma in our culture, let alone globally, which 1 in 3 women are estimated to have been sexually abused. 1 in 2 women, we were speaking about this, have been in a physically abusive relationship. This embeds in our body, this embeds in our subcortical brain, and it becomes part of who we are. And often it's so painful. It's hard to even remember the thing that might have happened. And even the thing that might have happened could be a sexual violation, or it could be a horrific, painful experience with labor or getting pregnant or just anything having to do with that part of our bodies. But because we live in a world that doesn't connect the dots between, oh, you have the symptom, sex is painful, or you're missing your periods, it doesn't, or whatever the various things are, it doesn't look at the bigger picture of what's it been like being you, and how has your body been touched or treated, and what pain have you known and gone through that may still be living inside of you in a very real neurobiological way that's informing your current experience.
So what's your process with women that come to see you, and how do you start that process with them, this journey that they're now committing to with you, and what does that look like?
Yeah. And I work so my background is psychology. I'm also an ordained minister, and I rely heavily and have been accredited in the field of relational neuroscience and polyvagal theory, which is essentially the science of feeling the science of feeling safe in our bodies and understanding what our brain does and how our brain is impacted by others. So I give that just for a little bit of context. So when women come to me, it's typically not because I don't advertise myself as a trauma specialist, even though I am trained in understanding how trauma embeds in us and informs us. And also I have a trauma history myself. So when a woman comes to me, that's not the leading reason that she's coming to me. The reason she might be coming to me is because, she's just miserable in relationships, right. Or she's, in the middle of her life, there's this dream that she has that she wants to experience or create, but she doesn't believe she can, or, whatever the presenting thing is.
Or if they're in crisis, maybe, right? Well, do you get people like, I'm going through a divorce and I need...
Yeah, crisis like that. Not like a mental health crisis or anything, but yeah, like they're in a big transition. Yeah. Their divorce just blew up. Their kids just left. Someone died. They're widowed. I mean, their job folded, whatever the thing was. So usually just as we're in the process of getting to know each other and creating safety within the relationship, it comes out that, my uncle molested me when I was 8, or I was date raped in college, or my personal trainer. I mean, I just had this happen to a client. She's, I think, 52. She was raped by her trainer. This was last year. And so it'll come out. They won't even realize, because we live in a world that doesn't highlight and empathize with the implications of these things. So they'll say it in a passing, like, this thing that happened, but I'm over it now.
Yeah.
And so usually so to me, I'm just collecting data. I'm learning from them, what they've gone through, where they're struggling. And then I'm there to help them start not only connecting dots and making sense out of why they're struggling here because this thing happened over there. And so we just kind of start the process of putting the dots together, as well as, there's skill building and, there's all sorts of things that happen.
And when you're in that process, like we talked about, the polyvagal, what you mentioned it now.
Yeah.
And because I feel like sometimes things happen, especially like in my age group. I think I'm probably 8 years older than you are, 8 to 10. You normalize things that happen to you. You, especially my generation of women, you don't think there's quite anything wrong with what happened to you.
Yeah.
You're not able to get to the place where, wait, that was wrong. But really back then, really, nobody would ever acknowledge that it was. So you kind of have come through life with a different reality. And I have to think it would be really hard with some women like that to even go back and go, oh my God, you're right. That was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the process of, it has to be starting over a little bit for women.
And And it's so easy to be sitting on the precipice of this big thing that happened that was never acknowledged, to then be feeling these feelings of like, oh no, is this going to blow me up? Or am I going to be so emotionally distraught?
Or with your
am I gonna have to
family
start
even.
over?
Like if you were
Which is normal.
Yeah, if you said it to your brother or your sister, or go, oh my God, this happened. And what would they say? Oh, stop it. You're being, you know what I mean? Or
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what you're speaking is so normal. And I think that's part of the power of even having these conversations, to start in a way to create a new normal of actually acknowledging what has happened. Because when we think of, if we went through something, especially when we were young, it's different. We're an adult, still difficult, but different. But if we're young, this hard thing happens and we're alone or unprotected, and there's no one there that's validating our experience or even saying, hey, are you okay?
Right.
So then we internalize that, and we then begin to distance ourselves from the pain of the thing that happened and how it lives in us. And we internalize the lack of support or the lack of acknowledgement. And so then we ourselves don't even know how to look at the thing or acknowledge the thing, because nobody modeled that around us. And so what I found is there's something that's so powerful. And this is part of the alchemy of how we heal. There's this phenomenon that we have this access to this incredible inherent health inside of us. It's just like knowing how to access it. And we need others to accompany us on the journey. So one of the things that you said that most stood out is what studies show us is trauma that actually embeds in our subcortical brain, which is where most 80% of our lived experience, everything from symptoms in our body, sensations in our body, aches and pains, cravings for food or substances, impulses that come out, reactions, the bulk of those stem from our implicit memory, which is basically, it's like the feeling of what it's like to be me, but I can't, like the me that just feels lonely, behind the scenes, but nobody might know about. Or the me that feels sad behind the scenes, like just what it feels like to be me as the wallpaper in the room, like my default feeling, is often what lives in our implicit memory. We don't have conscious awareness of it, but there's these collections of things that may have occurred when we were little. We can't remember, but they go into this part of our brain, especially if it's emotionally impactful and hard, and there was nobody there. So the thing that studies show is that if we go through a hard thing and nobody is there to help us process it, metabolize it, walk us through the grief or the shock or the anger back then it moves into our downstairs brain, which is our subcortical brain, and it starts to inform our reality. But we just don't know it, or we don't remember it, or we don't know what to do with it. So we just push it away because it's in our downstairs brain, and we just figure it's a thing, that'll always be there. So then we take antidepressants, or we, do all the other things to adapt. So just to the piece of like, to the woman that walks in and is like, oh my God, there's this thing that happened to me. Nobody's ever acknowledged it. I don't really want to touch it now because it might blow up my family. The thing that I continue to find is the more that we can provide a sense of, there's something amazing that happens when we can come together in a place of just being with and bearing witness to.
Right.
Not in a forceful, like, you have to remember what are the details. It's more like, wow, let's just sit with, the part of you that lived through that. And maybe let's just give her a minute to see that we're here with her. Yeah. And that, that we acknowledge or recognize that maybe she's been hurting for a long time and feeling alone for a really long time. And let's just be with her for a minute. And there's something that happens in this process of being with ourselves and being with another when we're talking about the hard things that actually starts the healing process in a very real neurobiological way, in a very real psychological way, and it can be amazing for symptom reduction as well.
Yeah, that's great. I want to take all this back to pelvic health, but I have a story before we do that because I have a twin. So a lot of our childhood experiences we had together because we were always together. But one summer, my dad was working like in Sacramento, and we went there for the summer. And my mom's like at the side of the pool. She met friends. My sister and I are in the pool. And this grown man, takes my sister and I to the deep end. Mm-hmm. And he's playing this game of tell me how many fingers I'm holding up. And we're both in the deep end with him going underwater. And he's like, when I hold up the fingers, grab a hold of my fingers and then tell me how, when I'm holding up. So we do it a couple times, and then the next thing we know, he's pulling out his penis.
I knew you were going there.
And he's waving it at us. And we're like underwater. And we can't even believe our eyes of what we're seeing. And but we knew well enough to just turn around and swim back to our mom.
Yeah.
But we never told my mom. We never spoke about it for years. We never said later that day, can you believe that guy did that? It was years later where we're like, did that happen? Wait, you were with me. Do you remember that? Is that true? Because you question the things, even when they're right in front of you happening as a young girl. You just can't believe that someone would do that. And that's not, being... I mean, I don't know what would happen had we grabbed it or whatever. I mean, but it was just a crazy experience.
Yeah.
And there were other things too we went through where we had each other, but again, didn't talk about it. And they,
And that's where I think for us women, especially, we're at an age where it's almost like I sort of look at it through the lens of, we've been living in a culture that has been supremely masculine dominant for the past 2,000, 2,500 years or so, which, the masculine forms of power are fantastic in certain things, building cities, industrial breakthroughs in science, like that sort of left hemisphere, really analytical, systems-based, like follow the formula sort of way of being is amazing. But the cost of that is there's a complete disconnect from warmth, connection, impact, and how we're all affected by each other. And so just when I think of like the world like that we live in, the ocean that we swim in, the air that we breathe has been so radically painted by this atmosphere of don't talk, don't feel, don't rock the boat, especially for little girls, becoming women. Like, be a good girl, be a pleasing girl. And when I grew up in the 70s, my mom's generation, your generation, grandparents' generation, like there was no space, and it was a survival response.
I don't think my mom would have even, I think she would have been like, oh no, he didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, she probably would have.
Yeah, because there was no modeling. There was no modeling for women that would actually stand up and speak out about the thing that was happening in their doctor's office, with their boss, behind closed doors with their husband, all of the things in terms of where we have largely, we have been objectified to such a degree where we've lost ourselves. And I think that's also the beautiful revolution that we're at we're forging new ground through now, is we're finding ourselves. Yeah. Like in women at large, but I think men too, because men have suffered greatly through growing up with disconnected moms. We see we're all impacted by it. So with what you're saying, just even I think having these conversations, the more we each have them, to say, oh, this thing happened to me, or I see this thing happen to you. It's not okay. And how do you feel about that? And like the more that we can start just even bringing, putting language on our real lived experience is so powerful and so healing and heroic.
Yeah. Because I think we do collect all those things. And as we go and get in that pattern of not speaking about it, making excuses for it, or you're just, the baggage part of that gets huge.
Yeah. There's so many costs. There's so much pain that comes with it. And really deep down, it's an erosion of self. We whittle ourselves down into some half version, of ourselves that we've thought we've needed to be, or what the world has told us. But deep, I do believe that in each of our hearts, there's some spark inside that longs for connection, that longs for self-awareness, that longs for that self-intimacy, that longs for that ability to take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. But it does require that we get to know ourselves and reconnect with ourselves. And
I also with women working with someone like you, it's different than a friend, because I found that even your friends can just not really take what you're saying very seriously sometimes, because they're still held within that same place of don't complain, don't talk about it, don't just move on, suck it up,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
Right. And I mean, I do think that there's something in that where, I, through the really picking myself up by my own bootstraps in a certain way, is how I've gotten to the place where I can sort of be that sacred witness or that sacred ally or whatever the language is that we want to put on it, to meet women where they're at, because I've had to really develop the capacity in myself, both from being a young woman, growing up in an alcoholic home, having a tremendous amount of sexual abuse, having a couple of suicide attempts, finding myself in mental institutions, and being pathologized horrifically as a 14-year-old girl. When I
Right.
look at 14-year-old girls now, it's like, oh my God, just these budding flowers. And so the me that lived through these experiences where not one person, I was in, I think, 4 different mental institutions and or eating disorder rehabs and drug rehabs as a young adolescent. And not one of them asked about what's going on,
Right.
what's going on at home that's causing this reckless behavior. Like, instead, the whole focus was on me as the problem and how they needed to medicate me or fix me so that way I wouldn't be such a risk to myself. Not one person. And I mean, it's still, in a way, that was really my drive in having known what, having lived through these things where nobody could even meet, even the professionals, nobody could meet me where I needed to be met as a young one. And that's part of, that has informed my not only willingness to devote myself to this professionally and all of the years of training and education that I've gone through, but also I recognize how vital and life-saving it was for me to start meeting people that weren't friends. I mean, friends are beautiful, but actual humans that were trained in the area that I needed to be met with, that had some sense of understanding of what was actually happening inside. So then they could help me make sense of all of the chaos that I felt inside because I was so unseen and unheard and all of that. So I think what you're saying, there's a lot of merit there. Our friends, often they're swimming in the same ocean that we are and still trying to find their way through too.
Exactly. And so at what point were you able to find those people to start healing? I know you did a lot of traveling.
Yeah, it's ongoing, but really that was a turning point. I had an overdose that led me into a coma, and I was in a coma for almost a week. And
How old were you?
I was just about 18. I think I was 17 when that happened, and had respiratory arrest. So my left lung collapsed. It was a morphine overdose. And when I came out of the coma, I had a bit of a proverbial spiritual awakening where something inside was like, no more, like the path of destruction that I had been on, which was really the path of unrecognized trauma and just all of the things that go with that. There was something in me that woke up and felt and called me into a new path. And with that, we were talking about, I had basically had this calling to go on a pilgrimage, but I didn't even know what a pilgrimage was. So I would go to Borders bookstore. You remember Borders bookstore and like research, like what's a pilgrimage? Because Google didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
And so essentially bought a one-way ticket to Spain for $300 and an LL Bean backpack and commenced a multi-year, pilgrimage around the world, all through Africa and Asia and Europe and the West Indies and sort of all around the world. And that I was called into like communes and ashrams and monasteries and all sorts of like really radical sort of healing environments. And so that really was a turning point for me. And that's when I started meeting people that could start bringing me the medicine, if you will, that I really needed, that my heart and soul really needed. So it's been a long progression and long journey of, finding my people.
Yeah. It's just really a remarkable story. And I feel like, well, you and I met originally from the office, but then when I met you in person, because we got together to chat about different things, when I saw you, you're just such a beautiful, bright soul and person. I can tell that you have these gifts to really help women. So I was really happy when we finally got you on the podcast. And we have so many patients, right, Duncan, that
the amount, the size of the task is almost overwhelming.
yeah.
It's just, as you said at the beginning, we said when we were talking the other day of the 1 out of 2, 1 out of 3 women. And actually, if you look at, let's say, less important events than the penis in the swimming pool, probably every woman has had some sort of exposure and some trauma there.
Yeah.
Do we wait for it to present itself in pelvic pain? And once we've ruled out the things that we can rule out, is the next step to somebody like yourself, or you just got to you need a factory of people like you that because the task is so immense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and we talked previously about how to start the treatment with this, and the person that needs the treatment needs to be in that position of safety before anything before it can even be brought up.
Right. And
it would seem to me that every woman needs somebody like you in their lives, just to maybe we just need to clone you. It's but it's I mean, every woman I care about, that's my daughter, my grandchildren, my partner, I just want them to have this sort of exposure of let's dive deep into this and just, this is without a symptom.
Yeah.
Okay. Just what can you think of in your life that has given you, if I would put into Eckhart Tolle's words, a pain body. I mean, it's maybe that's a little different from polyvagal theory, in that in the polyvagal theory, it's not acknowledged initially until somebody dives deep into it, but it can be recognized as a pain body that because all the feelings come back to that point, feelings that were experienced before that are not actually felt at this time. So I guess the enormity of the task just is almost overwhelming, and I'm so happy to have you on this podcast just to expose the world to it. It's in some little way.
Yeah.
Is there an age that you think women are like, oh, that's a great age to start looking at these things? Or is it maturity?
I think it's so subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I think it's so subjective. And it's also, do we have the resources? Do we have the capacity? Do we have, we can't start looking at these things in a way until our baseline needs are met. So I do think it is, I recognize the privilege in this conversation, because if we're, in a war zone or in a natural disaster zone, or if we're like, food and shelter is not easily accessible, that's a different conversation. Equally important, equally necessary, it's a different conversation. But when we think about what age, I think of it as more capacity. Like, do we have the capacity to do we have the emotional capacity? Do we have and I don't mean this to like, intimidate people, but it's more like there's got to be that feeling inside. I think there's a saying, I'm not part of the 12 steps, but I think there's a saying that, it's something about hitting bottom, and I'm forgetting what the saying is. But like, we have to have that yearning inside. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I think less about age and more about the feeling of, okay, this is mine to do. Like, this isn't working. I'm depressed. I'm unhappy. I'm in pain. There's all this cluster of things on the outside. I have money and my life looks great and I drive a nice car and I live in a nice house and I've accomplished these things. But inside, I don't feel good. And I find that most of us, we have a tipping point with that where enough is enough. And then we start reaching out for help. And I think that's really what I found is the tipping point, because if we haven't connected with that willingness or interest to heal, to grow, to move beyond, to integrate, then it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So it's more of, in a way, it's like between us and our soul. When is it my time to start blooming? And, to your point, Duncan, of what you said, it is, when I look at all of the systems in the world that are in crisis right now, it is overwhelming. It's like, and I think of Sinead O'Connor's Rhodes, God bless her soul, where she mentioned something like to be healthy and well adjusted in a supremely sick society is not a measure of health, or something like that. Right. There was some version of saying that it's not appropriate to attempt to be well adjusted in the supremely sick society that we find ourselves in. However, to me, and I reflect on, there's this beautiful place down over the border in Mexico. It's called Rancho La Puerta. And it's this healing arts resort
I've heard
center.
Of that place, yeah.
And it's this woman, this 101-year-old woman. She's still alive. She started this 83 years ago. And what this one woman has developed, everything from not only putting, 10,000 acres of land into a land trust, and is doing organic gardening, this amazing water filtration, in terms of filtering sewage water for irrigation. She ran for Congress. She supports, I think, 15,000 residents a year in Tecate for healthcare. And she's done all of these amazing things. And one person asked her at one point, what's your secret to vitality? Because at 101, she's still rocking and rolling. And she said, I learned a long time ago to not look at all of the problems of the world because they're overwhelming. And instead, I look at what's in front of me and what can I do something about. So to me, I really took that to heart. And even in these important conversations that we have, it's like, what's the one thing that I can do? Who's the one person in front of me that I can touch with caring, with awareness, with attentiveness, with attunement, and meet them maybe where they've never been met before, in a place of kindness and compassion and caring. And to me, that's the groundswell that I'm part of, is like, how can we start finding our way back to each other? And then to your point of what you mentioned about safety, there's a lot of ideas about safety, ranging from, I'm safe, I'm not living in a war zone, or, there's spiritual ideology about being safe, spiritually. And what I love, Dr. Stephen Porges, who's one of my teachers, and he's the founder of polyvagal theory, he describes safety as being in the body. That safety is actually a biological absence of threat, and our body actually feeling safe and not taking in cues of threat or danger around us. And that, I think of how amazing would that be if we were to walk through our lives just simply focusing on how to create a safe space for you, the front one inside of me, so you're not in threat because of the way I'm talking at you or the way I'm treating you. All the things that we've been learned to do to treat other people, in rude, curt, sort of short, judgmental ways. It's like, if we can be a presence of kindness that actually cares about creating a safe space in our conversation, in your room as a doctor, with people coming in with these really big things that they might be grappling with, but they're coming to you for a pelvic pain or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like to create safety in the room with our kids, with our partners. To me, I think that's revolutionary.
I thought, when we had that conversation, you talked about safety. That's what I thought of as safety.
Yeah.
It wasn't from the bombs falling around. It was that personal safety of what am I not scared of right now? Okay, just what and trying to create that. Really a learning experience.
Yeah, because I think we all sort of live in fight or flight. Well, I think we've been conditioned.
Well, even conditioned, it's as a mammal, it's a survival response, like that fight or flight mode of our sympathetic nervous system came into being 300 million years ago. And so it's it is hardwired into us.
Yep.
So, and I feel like there's even an opportunity to really shame around that in terms of it's okay to be in fight or flight. It's okay to sort of go into a collapsed state of freeze or helplessness, because that's what we mammals do when we take in cues that feel unsafe to us. But the question is how do we come back into connection? How do we come back into a place of feeling warm and open and connected to our hearts and connected to our generosity? Because that's when we're no longer in a threat response. Our nervous system has equalized into they call it the ventrovagal, state. And then we can actually operate from a place of creating a sense of belonging and welcoming, in ourselves and for those that we're connecting or relating with. But to even just take the shame away from being in fight or flight. I mean, I'm in fight or flight all the time, but I also know how to it's like, but I know how to come back into connection.
What's your opinion on like women or young girls? They go through something and they say, I knew it was off. I knew it was wrong. And I just froze. Yeah. I froze and I couldn't. And I never thought in a million years I would just freeze, but I did. Yeah. What is that? What makes a person that way? Or what makes a response that way? Do you have thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of thoughts about that, both from the learned response of whatever their environment was growing up in that maybe taught them to avoid or look away or discount their gut sense. But again, I look with very deep eyes, and I kind of look, I look back to the feminine Holocaust, where 9 million women were burned at the stake. And at that time, I see, and I've done some research around this, that women at that time, just to give a little sense of context as to how I feel like it plays out now, is because the way women would be captured and they'd be tortured unless they'd be tortured to give the name of three other women that were also witches. And this was, again, 9 million women were burned at the stake. And based on how quick they gave the names, the torture would be less and they'd be killed. So they discovered they had to give names so they could get out of the torture and they would just get killed. And so women at that time, as an act of self-preservation, and this kind of blew my mind, women and grandmothers started learning that they had to shut their little girls and daughters down. Don't shine, don't be bright, because this is at a time where the Inquisition was like, traveling through all of the countryscapes and really looking for the girls that stood out, the girls that were bright, the girls that had that light in their eyes, the girls that had some level of precocious wisdom, because they were deeply at risk. So the women, out of an act of love for saving their daughters and granddaughters, started like, you didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything, you're not feeling that, like just shut it down to save their lives. And it still gives me chills when I think of that, of how that has stayed with us since then.
Oh yeah, it's the house I grew up in.
Yeah, right. And so when we track it back, however many generations back, it's like we see that there actually was an act of love that was a necessity at the time to do that. That was life-saving. Circumstances are different now, obviously, but it's still been encoded in how we've been conditioned. Wow. And so to me, again, I kind of pan out and look at the big picture, and then I look at how it shows up in the house you grew up in, how it shows up in the house I grew up in, how we still teach women in so many different ways to just ignore your pain, just to take a pill, or, you're making it up, you're crazy, it's in your head, emotional pain, physical pain, whatever it is. And so to me, we're really, so on a social conditioning level, I attribute it to that. But then also because we have been so cut off from knowing how to honor and trust our animal instincts, which is our autonomic nervous system, again, we've learned to override it or just endure. Like, oh, I'm scared all the time. My heart is racing all the time. That's just normal. What can I take for it? Oh, like I feel terrified or depressed, or I just don't even want to get out of bed. I'm just going to Netflix. I'm just going to binge on Netflix and just wish I wasn't here and taking antidepressants because I'm so depressed that I don't even know what the point of my life is. These are all autonomic nervous system states of dysregulation and threat that also contribute to it. So I look at it through the lens of how we've been conditioned, but also how we've learned how we don't know how to trust or read the cues of our body responses.
Yeah, not at all.
But we're doing it.
Right.
We're coming back. I have faith.
No, I do too. What's the difference between traditional talk therapy and you?
Oh my God. Well, I'm happy to say there's a big difference.
Yes, I know, but I want you to go into it because I think that people listening might be like, well,
You know, one is because I don't, I am not a therapist. I'm trained in a lot of clinical ways, but I'm not a therapist. So I just, want to be exceedingly clear with that. And God bless, the people that are licensed in the therapeutic world, because it's so important and we need really good mental health care. But because I operate under the coaching umbrella, although my background is in psychology and I have been trained, I actually love this question, so I want to think of how to answer this. What the difference is because I'm not bound as a clinician, I can pull from multiple skill sets. So that's one thing. I have a lot more of a range in how I work with people. But most specifically, I think what sets me apart is modern therapy, modern psychology, just like a lot of like Western medicine, in terms of physical pain management or physical symptom reduction or physical health care. Again, I feel like some really good and well-intentioned dudes, created it. So like even the Western therapeutic model or psychological model often sort of assumes that we're operating in our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that we have choice and willpower within, which is a very, very small percentage of our experience can actually be shaped, especially if we're talking about deep emotional pain that we're carrying. Very few of us can actually command ourselves to think new thoughts, feel new feelings, make a new choice. But traditional psychology lives in that model that, let's diagnose your issue. Let's give it a name. Here's what you're pathologized as someone that has complex post-traumatic stress disorder or, fill in the blank. And then you have to make some new choices to control yourself and start thinking new thoughts and talking to yourself in new ways. And if you're feeling that feeling and that's a negative feeling, don't feel it. Choose a new feeling. So there's all sorts of assumption that we can control our internal experience. And what neuroscience has shown us, and thank God, especially in the past 20 odd years, it shows us that the parts of the brain that operate, that really rule our life. Carl Jung talks about Carl Jung talks about, and until we, and again, because I was in a different flow, the words might be different here, but the idea is until we bring the light to the shadow, which is really our subconscious operating systems inside, we will call it fate, but really it's the shadow. So this idea that we will sort of write it off as like, oh, we're just meant to be that way, we're screwed up forever, and this is just sort of my lot in life, which modern therapy really kind of does a lot of putting icing on a bundle of unresolved issues that they don't really know anything about.
Right.
And they'll tell people that they should be able to heal themselves or fix themselves. But really they're not able to. So then they feel worse and they feel that there's something wrong with them and they give up and they don't get back to therapy. So what's different for me with a background of relational neuroscience is just really an understanding of how our brains work. And our brains don't work that way. The parts of our brain that actually hold, and if this is being filmed, it's like, this is Dan Siegel's hand model. Here's our brainstem. Here's our downstairs brain, our subcortical brain. And then here's our neocortex that folds over it. This downstairs brain, our subcortical brain, which we do not have any conscious awareness of, this holds all the things that we ever learned that were difficult. And until they actually get met with curiosity, with caring, like, oh, you have a chronic stomach ache. Let's pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. And if your stomach could talk, what might it say? And how do you feel towards the part of you that's suffering from this chronic stomach ache? These are just ways that I'm giving some examples on how I work, which is different. I've actually learned to turn towards. I know the things that are actually stored in here are the things that are manifesting of oh, I just have low self-esteem, or I just feel ashamed, or I want a relationship, but I've been single for 30 years and I don't dare get close to someone. Mm-hmm. I know that what they're actually telling me is that there's a lot of stuff in here that they haven't had a chance to come into and really bring into the light, right, to bring compassion and caring to. So what's different about how I work is I do not subscribe to the pathologizing Western model of diagnosis and you're sort of like, you're screwed with this, maybe we can like give you some skills to make it a little better to mitigate your pain, but you're going to be stuck with the pain forever. I have learned through the awe of how us humans are created that our brains are actually really primed. There are these phenomenons that occur that allow us to go into our core beliefs and allow us to bring in the conditions of how to open the neural networks that contain the old beliefs so we can reconfigure them. And I don't mean to bore people, with the science behind it, but to me, there's a phenomenon in how our brain wants to integrate. Our brain wants to heal. Our brain wants to sort of, like we want to flourish. Our system wants to flourish. And we just need to know how to work in cooperation with how we are, instead of being another finger pointing and, oh, you should be like this, you shouldn't be like this.
Right.
So I'd say that's one of the biggest differences, is that
Well, it's huge. Yeah.
yeah. And then I do work under sort of a spiritual assumption that each one of us, like that we're these divine beings having a human experience, and that there is something holy about our pain and our wounds. And there's something also holy about our gifts and our ability to minister to ourselves, really.
Yeah, which makes sense, because our pains contribute a lot to who we are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not all bad. We went to what did we go to the other night about the neural
pathways.
The neural pathways, a talk. And it's a company in town. Have you heard of, what was the name of it? It's a husband and wife team.
Oh, is it neurofeedback? Is it
Yeah.
Yeah. I have worked not with her, but one of her lead trainers.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating.
It is, yeah.
Again, I was sort of taken there, sort of almost kicking and screaming.
I said, we have to go.
And then afterwards I said, man, I'm really glad we went.
What a good sport you are.
It was good.
It was, and basically they're just looking at EEGs and how things are changing and what information we can get from.
Yeah, I did 35 neurofeedback sessions last year, just as a matter of curiosity to see, to have a direct experience with it.
Oh, what was your experience?
It was a lot. I mean, it was pretty amazing. Like the metrics that we were looking at, bringing things more online, or creating a little bit of an inhibitory response. It was really amazing just to watch through the mapping, like how my brain was responding to it. So yeah, it was really cool.
And you wore like the cap thing, and
Yeah, that's definitely in my future.
Yeah, right on.
For sure. You quoted the Dalai Lama and whatever information you.
And look how far your mic is from you, Duncan. By the way.
Hello. I came back.
That's amazing. How does that even happen?
I don't even know. It happens every episode.
It's like you floated away on a float in a river.
It's like
I was just. You two were just on a roll. All I had to do was just sit back and listen.
Because I do feel, I'm like, okay, you're part of us, even though like we're riffing here, like we're with you still. Yeah, the Dalai Lama.
Western women will help save the world.
Yeah, he
makes
in a
perfect sense.
Press conference a few decades ago.
Yeah,
he said that. And during the pandemic, there was another press conference where he was further really imploring women to come up into positions of leadership. But the thing is leadership isn't a word that women naturally gravitate to, because in a way it kind of like it belongs to the patriarchy. And again, I love men. I'm not at all one of these, feminists that are like, bashing the patriarchy. I'm more just naming the out of balance sort of system that we're in. And so the Dalai Lama has been really imploring women to step up into places of leadership, whether women even recognize themselves as leaders or not. Being a mom is being a leader, being, a loving wife is being a leader, like leading the household, leading neighborhood associations, leading, if they work in their career, leading on a global stage. So really he was further just saying, if we're going to make it through, we need to create a more compassionate society, which is further why he's encouraging and inviting women to step up to the table more, because really it is a life or death situation that we're in at this point.
I agree.
It's so easy to distract ourselves from it, but statistically things are really there. We are on the edge right now.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about. Okay, no, you go on. No, you go.
Please.
Yeah, we'll cut this part out.
You do it.
Was that like the awkward pause that you were talking about?
No, but sometimes he has something to say, but he acts like he wants me to say something. So,
Duncan, do you have anything to say?
Not a word.
I want to go to her. You can do it. The pushing boundaries part of your original makeup, we know about her life experience, but I like your answer to this question. Wait a minute. Yeah. Wait a minute. Not that one. I'm sorry. On the lighter side, the fun fact about you.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
What was the fun fact about me?
Okay, so
I've already done skydiving, firewalking, having lived in 32 countries by myself, had a near-death experience. So right now my bucket list is more about cuddling with my kitties and working in my garden.
Yes.
Perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
And somebody described you as, or I think actually you thought that they might describe you, and I think it's accurate, deep, empathetic, and an ability to laugh. Mm-hmm. You've certainly laughed at me a lot today. Sounds good.
Well, you are really easy to laugh at, Duncan.
Yeah, exactly.
He sets himself up for laughter.
Yeah.
There's something about those big eyes that just like warrants like chuckles.
Good. Rather that than tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when is our conversation going to start? Was that just the prelude?
Yeah, that was just the prelude. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just in terms of like working this type of practice into our practice, and this can be on the podcast or it can just be a conversation that we have, but I think we need to have it.
What I would love to see, as it relates to the conversation that we had off air the other day about this, is for, good people like yourself that are in the field of women's health. And given that it is such a delicate arena that has a lot of connectivity to potential past traumas that have occurred in their body, I would love to see that not only is there a way to create a safe space to acknowledge if this happens, if this lives in you, like, have you gone through this? Have you considered that this thing that you went through at this other place in your life may be connected to the health issues that you're having right now? So one, where there's even the dots connected of like, have you considered in a safe, warm way, not like you're a lab rat and, I don't really care about you and I'm going to tell you what you need to do, but really like, have you considered that there's this thing that you went through that was difficult and maybe there's a connection to what's happening in your pelvic health? I think that would be an extraordinary service. And also, just as if we go to our, primary care doctor and we're having more of a specialized issue, they would refer to a specialist. Mm-hmm. They would go to a sleep specialist, go to a cardiologist, go to a neurologist. And that doctors everywhere would have a referral network to give to people that do have a trauma history that could actually help them in the areas that they need to be helped. Yeah. I think those two things would be extraordinary. Just to be naming that if you've gone through this, maybe there's a connection. Right. And I really feel for you. Mm-hmm. And help is available. Here's a referral for a resource that might be someone that can, that would be really good to talk to. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just let's touch briefly on your book. You have a book, right?
I have a book?
Yeah. Do you have a book?
I mean, I do have a manuscript, but we haven't talked about it.
Okay, wait. Okay. I don't know.
I mean, maybe you're just seeing into like it's one of my projects that's covert and behind the scenes, but
I don't know. Maybe you and I talked about it.
Maybe.
It just came up.
Yeah.
So.
Because I didn't know anything about a book.
Yeah, I don't know why it just came into my mind. I thought you had a book or you were working on a book or...
I have some embryos frozen that's called a manuscript.
Okay.
That will be at some point. There will be a gestation period for it.
I love that. Okay,
but it's in the freezer right now.
Let me know. I mean, maybe we just talked about it at some point.
Maybe, yeah.
Anyway, it's been fun.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege having you on the Vagina Doctor podcast. Thanks.
Oh, I'm curious. Thank you, and I love being here. And I'm curious, like, do you have an insight just from all of the women that you've seen over the years? And do you have an insight that hasn't been named yet in the medical world that you're in terms of what would help women in this way? In terms of connecting the dots from how their history may be showing up through reproductive pain or challenges?
No, I think more so this has opened my eyes to the probability of a connection there. And therefore, I mean, I think you've just given me a tool as to how to approach that. As I said to you the other day when we were talking about pain with intercourse, you know, let's put this question on our new patient questionnaire. I don't think this is one to put on, on the new patient questionnaire, but it is absolutely open for discussion. And but it needs to be in that safe zone.
Yeah.
And it's I feel like I can do that. I think I can bring those questions to the forefront. And that should be a goal.
And I want to second that just from the experience. Like, I met you coming in as a client, and you were probably maybe the 5th GYN that I have gone to as I'm entering, this certain age stage of my life and my hormonal journey and the changes that are happening. And you were the first person that sat down and talked with me for, was it almost an hour? I think that alone was so impactful to me in seeing who you were, not only as a doctor, but as a man that cares about his patients. And so I just want to acknowledge that just my experience of you was like, wow, I felt like there was space to actually share versus being rushed through intake and with 6 other patients piled up and just the hurried, which I get, it's an underfunded, undersupported field. I love, I'm in support of all women's healthcare practitioners, but I just really appreciated your presence and the spaciousness to ask questions and listen.
Thank you. That is the intent, of course. I mean, it's why we have the model the way it is. And I do get frustrated by not having enough time. But I really appreciate your experience, you voicing it that way. Thanks.
And it'd be interesting having a someone, I mean, I just even wonder, like, in your office or in your sphere that maybe can have these prelim conversations with women. It's just a thought. And I mean, we can talk more about that. But just bringing it into the office where it is a little bit more normalized.
Yeah.
Like even just as if you're aware, if you've had anything, any sort of trauma, in your history as it relates to your pelvic region, we have so-and-so that is here to talk with you about that, if it's helpful. Something like that, just almost like presenting it like a menu option. Yeah. So then women can just even know that it's there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Good idea. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thanks for listening. We're getting really good feedback. We'd really appreciate a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Thank you. You can always DM the Vagina Doctor Instagram with any questions or topics you'd like to learn more about, or email us. The Vagina Doctor Podcast. It all starts here.